and welcome back to another episode of Sidebar Social. I'm your co-host, Jennifer Grinke.
Whoa, now I'm the host?
I know, because I didn't want you to say, and I guess I'm your co-host.
Okay, well, I'm Dana Stewart, the host of this show.
Yeah, he's the main host.
I'm the main host, yep. And we're in a new studio.
We are. This is our first time in our studio at our office.
That's right. We took a little bit of a hiatus. We figured you missed us, so now we're back.
We're back.
New studio. I have a story for you.
Okay.
So, Friday, we were at that networking event.
Yeah.
Right? Then after that, I was out running errands. I went back home real quick and then had to go return things, do a bunch of stuff. When I got home, I realized I had not taken my vitamins from that morning. It's like a whole bunch, right?
Yeah.
So I took them and I'm driving, and 20 minutes later, I start getting real hot.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm overheating, and I realize I hadn't eaten anything in a while. And so that always happens if I take my vitamins. So I'm on this road and there's nowhere to go to the right. And so I'm just going to have to U-turn because it's getting to the point where I feel like I'm going to throw up. And I'm sweating. And I'm like, hey, this is bad. I get up to this place to U-turn and it says no U-turn. And this is 8 o'clock at night. And I'm like, oh, screw it. I'm just going to do it. As soon as I hit the turn, cop right there, boom, pulls me over, lights me up. I swing into this gas station and I kick open my door. And I'm like this, I'm about to throw up, and the cop hits me with a light and he goes, stay in your vehicle. And then I'm like, sir, I'm going to throw up. I'm going to throw up. And then he comes around, he's watching me, and I'm breathing heavy and I'm trying to compose myself.
This is crazy.
And then, so then he starts talking to me. He's like, what's wrong? I go, oh, I took a bunch of supplements. And he's like, well, what do you take? I'm like, oh, I take a whole bunch of stuff. And then I tell him fish oil is one of them. And he goes, every time I take fish oil, it makes me sick. He was a young guy. I could tell he worked out,
Yeah.
So then he was cool. He let me get my composure. So then we're sitting there for a minute. So then I tell him, I'm like, just to let you know, I have a license to carry. I have my gun on me. And he goes, where's your gun? I go, it's appendix. He goes, cool. You don't touch yours. I won't touch mine. I'm like, that sounds like a good plan. So then I gave him all my my ID and everything. He went back and I'm still sitting there drinking water, trying to calm down.
Yeah.
He came back and he's like, okay, everything's good. And then he pauses and he does this. And then he goes, I got to go. And he hands me my ID and he takes off and he flips on his sirens and just peeled out of there. I don't know where he was going, but that was it. So then I'm just sitting there on the side of the road, trying to breathe and not throw up. So it was
I'm glad you got away from the cops this time.
Got away. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm learning.
Doesn't always happen every day.
I'm learning. Yes. Okay. So that was a long-winded story. What are we talking about today?
Okay, so today we're talking about prenups and postnups, and I feel like they get a bad rap. Don't you feel like they do?
They do. I feel like people think it's like a, if you do it, it's like a bad sign or a bad omen or something.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad marriage or bad relationship just because you put something in writing.
But the reality is, and I feel like we tell this to clients too, if you're going into business with somebody, you structure that deal and the terms of it at the beginning when everybody is at peace with each other. You don't wait till someone's mad to then try to figure out how are we going to handle our affairs. And it's no different than with the prenup.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about prenups, and I feel like the good thing about them is that you can basically plan what you want for your life and for your finances.
Right.
So let's say that you get divorced or that you pass away. It's going to fall under the laws of Texas or wherever it is that you are. And so this gives you a chance to put in writing what you want for your finances.
Right. So let's break it down. What is a prenup?
Okay. So a prenup is a document that is confidential and it is signed by you and your fiance, and it will contain how you want your property to be disposed of, either at divorce or death. I feel like a lot of people think, hey, I don't have $1 million. I don't have $1 billion. I don't need a prenup. Who is a prenup for?
I mean, it can be for anybody. I mean, it's a good question, but where we see it a lot, people that are entering a second marriage or sometimes third or fourth marriage. But somebody coming into life or into a relationship that maybe has already lived a lot of life and maybe they have substantial assets, they have a business they want to protect, or somebody that maybe inherited something from their family. We see that a lot, right? They want to protect their inheritance, which under our laws in Texas, an inheritance is separate property, but then we can get nuanced where sometimes income made off those assets can end up being community property, which means it would be owned by you and your spouse. So it's a cleaner way to protect what you believe should be yours as the person going into the marriage through signing a prenup. Who
Yeah.
else have you seen, use them?
I feel like there's a more of a trend now with, like, younger people getting married, like 30-year-olds, late 20-year-olds getting married that just want to have a say in their life and their finances, and so I've seen, people watch their parents go through a divorce, and it was nasty, and so they're like, "Hey, I wanna avoid all that even though I don't have a lot of assets right now." Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and because if you don't have a premarital agreement, then when you get divorced, it is the state that's gonna tell you how things are gonna operate, who gets
Yeah.
what, right? So, to your point, if you want a voice in that, then a premarital agreement is a way to ensure that your desires are taken into account.
Follow us and join the conversation on Instagram and YouTube at Sidebar Social.
So let's talk about now, like, what do you have to be a legitimate prenup?
Okay, so first of all, you have to be able to consent to the prenup.
Okay.
So you
Can't be
have to
drunk.
have, yeah, you can't be drunk, you can't be under duress. You have to have the mental capacity consent to the prenup. You also have to disclose to your future spouse all of the assets and debts that you're aware of that you have in your name. So that's a big part of the process because later on, if someone goes to contest the prenup and you haven't done that step, that can be a problem because now you're signing something not having full knowledge as to what it is that you could potentially be giving up. The prenup also has to be in writing and it has to be signed and notarized.
Perfect. So once you have all those boxes checked, then you have a legitimate premarital agreement.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
And so you kind of touch on this already, that without duress, right? So the
Mhm.
idea, it's got to be voluntary.
Yeah.
What would be an example of an involuntary signature on a premarital agreement?
I think times when I've seen that, it's the day before the wedding and they're like, hey, if you don't sign this, I'm not going to marry you. Or they're not from this country, I'm going to deport you back to the other country and not marry you if you don't sign this. So something like that.
Right. Especially where they don't have an opportunity to go consult with an attorney, meaning the one being asked to sign the prenup. If they just sign it last minute before a wedding and haven't been able to get competent legal advice, then that could potentially fall into that duress.
Yeah, that's a big part of what we advise when we have a prenup is to make sure that your future spouse has their own attorney or they've had the option to be aware that they have the right to their own attorney. And we put very strict language in there saying you had this right and or you had your attorney, this is who it was. You know exactly what you're signing.
Right. So let's talk about what a prenup can actually do.
Can do a lot.
Okay, well, let's get into it.
Yeah.
What can it do?
So, for the most part, it's going to divide the assets and debts in a way that says, "Hey, this is my property. This will be community property or separate property." I know we've kind of touched on that on previous episodes, but community property would be basically anything you guys acquire together during the marriage, whereas separate property is anything you had before the marriage or anything you inherited or gifted during the marriage. So, the main thing it's going to do is characterize assets. It's going to divide assets, and then you can get creative. I mean, can you think of a creative one that you've had to deal with?
Yes, can. So I actually had a situation, somebody that I know who, in the premarital agreement, it stated that if he ever was found to have committed infidelity, there was going
It's a
to be
good
a
one.
payment to his soon-to-be spouse. Now, in talking with this gentleman, I didn't think that was a good idea because based on what he disclosed to me, there's been a lot of infidelity in the past.
Yeah,
But
he's gonna be paying a lot of money.
because of that, the soon-to-be wife, I guess, didn't trust him. Makes sense. So then decided, okay, if we are going to do this, then here's what I want for a financial penalty, so to speak. And so we built that into the prenup, even though I cautioned him against doing it. It's what he wanted to do. So that is a creative way that an issue can be addressed.
Yeah, I think another thing that I see a lot is if you're gonna keep all the properties separate, so you're not gonna acquire property together as spouses, and then one spouse is gonna not work and stay home with the kids. Typically, there's a payout structure. So if they've been married a certain amount of time, they'd get a certain percentage of what the other person has, or a dollar amount payout, or something like that.
Right. And I guess high level, what a prenup can do is basically change the rules in Texas where it says anything, like Jen mentioned, anything you acquire as a couple is presumed to
Mhm.
be owned by both of you, whether that's titled in one spouse's name or not, it's presumed to be owned by both of you. Prenup can say, well, no, we're not going to do that. And instead, anything I have now and anything I do with what I have now later in the future will always be my separate property, meaning a court can't take it from me.
Yeah, and I think too you can get creative in the prenup. As long as it's not illegal, I feel like you can put it in there for the most part. So I've had some where, there's almost like non-disclosure agreements in there. You can't talk bad about the other person. If they get divorced, you can't talk about why the divorce happened. So there's a lot of different things you can do, especially if you're marrying somebody who's in like a high profile position, like an athlete or a movie star or something like that.
To learn more about Grinke Stewart Family Law, visit grinkestewartlaw.com.
Okay, so we've talked about what the prenups can do in general. Can you tell me what they can't do?
The easier way to answer it is that they can pretty much do anything, but they cannot violate public policy.
Okay.
I guess probably what we see a lot of clients want to put in there is something to do with children. And if we get divorced, then here's what the possession schedule will be, or here's how much support he or she's willing to pay. But when it comes to children, the court's going to have the final say in that. So
Yeah.
parties can put language into a prenup, but you cannot force a court to follow that language. So I think that's an important distinction there. So it's a pretty broad tool that you can use, but there are
Mhm.
limitations like that. Can you think of any other limitations?
No, I think that pretty much summarizes it. The biggest one is you just can't do anything illegal. I mean,
Right.
obviously against public policy, but you can't ask somebody to break the law in the prenup.
Right. Even if they agree to do it, it's not
Yeah.
valid. So how do you go about, like, what's the logistical process for this? We have maybe somebody watching is interested. When should they start those conversations? How do they
Yeah.
approach that with their soon-to-be spouse?
So I would start it as soon as possible because these conversations are obviously very touchy subjects. And unless you and your fiance are on the exact same page, I would say it takes, 3 to 6 months to come up with an agreement like this because you're trying to think long term, like what do I need in terms of my finances? What if I'm married to this person 5, 10, 15, 20 years as, my entire life? Like, what's that going to look like? What if your spouse has a business that they're growing and then you stay home? So there's just a lot to consider
Yeah.
in the prenup. So I say start as soon as possible.
Yeah.
You can also put into them, so you could sign it early on and you could say, if we don't get married within the next 6 months, this expires because I know things
We've had
change.
that.
Yeah, so you can put expirations on them. You can even put expirations on them like, hey, if we've been married 10 years, then the prenup dissolves.
Right.
Can you amend prenups?
Well, you can. It's so unlike amending a will where you can do something called a codicil to a will. You can just like essentially staple a page to a will and make a change.
Yeah.
With a prenup, once you're married, you can change it, but now we're looking at what we would just call a postnuptial agreement. So you can make certain changes. That's a totally different document executed while you're married versus what we're talking about signing before the parties ever do get married.
Yeah.
That's a good question, though.
And can you force someone to sign one if
No.
they don't want to sign it?
No, you can't force them. And we have that. So I just had a conversation with a gentleman who he wants to get married, that he wants a prenup. He's basically wants kind of the traditional prenup, what I would call it, where everything he has now is his separate property. All income he's going to make in the future will be his separate. It's all separate. The soon-to-be wife does not have a lot of assets. And so what I've told him is, look, you can propose this, but she's giving up a lot of what would be hers under the law if you guys got married without a prenup. She's waiving a right to all this potential income.
Yeah.
So what's the incentive? And he said, well, if she doesn't like that, then we just won't get married. I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's what it is. You can't force her. But for those of you who are thinking about getting a prenup, you also have to think about it from the other side of you may have to give some kind of enticer to the other person to be willing to waive their rights to sign it.
Yeah.
Like we've seen it where, okay, upon signing this after the first year, you get X amount of dollars or whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
So something that we deal with quite a bit
Mhm.
is somebody's curious about trying to challenge or void a prenup.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how can that occur? Like when do you think you have a good case to challenge?
Yeah. So when you have a good case to challenge is typically when somebody signed the document and they didn't understand what they were signing. So they didn't know that they had a right to an attorney. Maybe they didn't understand the language. They were signing it very close to the date that they were married, and they didn't have a full disclosure of all the assets and debts. I think they're hard to challenge. So these are hard things to win. So you really need to be making informed decisions when you sign the prenup. But there are certain circumstances where somebody was put in a bad position and they were in a lesser position than the other person. Maybe they didn't have financial resources, or they felt forced into signing the prenup. So there are situations where you can challenge it, but I would say that's one of the harder things to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most ironclad documents people will sign. So if you're going to sign it, understand, I would go into it assuming you're never going to be able to get out of it.
And so once they're signed, where are they kept? Because I feel like this is something that a lot of people don't know, that we
Yeah.
don't file them with the court.
Right. Yeah, we don't file them with the court. So where are they kept? So assuming you had attorneys involved in this, your attorney should have a copy of it. But you as the client should also keep a copy. I would have one scanned somewhere, like have a digital version. If you have a hard copy, keep it in a safe at home or a safe deposit box. You need to have it somewhere where you can get to it, because we've actually had situations where parties signed a prenup years ago. The attorneys that they used are dead, or
Yeah.
they stopped practicing. They can't find them anymore, and they don't have a copy of that premarital agreement. And without that document, there is no way to actually ensure what you agree to do years before is going to be followed, because the court won't have anything to reference. So you
Yeah.
should always keep at least a copy for yourself. You could even send it to a family member that you trust, just to make sure you have it accessible when you need it.
What would you say are some common mistakes you see when people go to think about getting a prenup?
Waiting till the week of the wedding to try to
That's
start
one of
the
my favorites.
process, right? We've
Yeah.
actually had that quite a bit. Don't do that. If you're
Yeah.
watching this,
Don't
do
do
not
that.
do that.
Yeah,
Jen touched on it before. She said 3 to 6 months. I think that's a pretty good time range. I'd say at the latest, begin it probably 3 months before you plan to get married, if not earlier than that. It takes time. Most likely your fiance will get an attorney. It's going to take time to get the drafting, go back and forth with revisions, plan a day where everybody can sign it. It takes time. So you do not want to wait to the last minute.
Yeah.
What have you seen?
I've seen some where the person just wants to marry the other person so bad that they're not thinking about long term, even though I'm having those conversations with them, like, how's this going to affect me in 5, 10, 15 years? If I'm supporting this person, will they generate their wealth? And then I don't have retirement. I don't have a business I've built, and I've stayed home with the kids. And so it puts them in a bad financial position where they're almost stuck in the marriage, and then potentially if the person dies, they can leave everything to somebody else.
So when you're representing a person who really just wants to get married, they're thinking more short term than long term.
Yeah.
What do you tell them to do as far as language in that prenup to try to help protect them in the long term?
Yeah, I just try to include as much language as I can regarding payouts that they could potentially get. Like you talked the clause about adultery, a payout for that. I've had some where every time they had a child, they got a certain amount of money. That way, it was kind of supplementing what the person would have potentially made if they had continued to work versus stayed home with the kids. So I think there's creative things that you can do, but those are just conversations that you need to be having with your attorney and need to be having with your fiance.
Every time they have a child with the person they sign a prenup with, correct? Just for
Yeah,
clarity.
not another person.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah,
that could be a clause
they're
too.
hooking up with someone
That
else. They're
could be a
not going to
clause
get paid
if
for
you
that
want
kid.
it. Yeah.
Okay, just clarifying.
Yeah.
So in summation, premarital agreements can be very helpful. It gives
Mhm.
you as the person signing a lot of control over what happens with assets and debts
Yeah.
compared to letting the state control it. It's not just for the uber wealthy, right? It's for anybody who's trying to be proactive and
Mhm.
thinking ahead. What other closing thoughts do you have?
They can just be a very useful tool prior to getting married. They can also be a useful tool after you're married if there's assets that you want to divide up after you're married for whatever reason. And I just think they get a bad rap, and I don't know why, because they can be a very helpful tool for both parties, even no matter if you have wealth or not wealth.
That's right. Okay, well, if you folks at home have questions about premarital agreements, you can reach out to us at Grinke Stewart Law. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time on Sidebar Social.